This is Dr. Wendy Widder and her teaching on the book of Daniel. This is session number 10, Daniel chapter 7, God's Superior King and Eternal Kingdom.
For this lecture, we are in Daniel 7, and I've titled Daniel 7, God's Superior King and His Eternal Kingdom. In terms of where we are in the book of Daniel, we have reached the end, or the last chapter in our Aramaic chiastic structure. So you remember we started with chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of this statue. Chapter 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faced the fiery furnace. Chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream of a magnificent tree, and he is ultimately judged for his pride. Chapter 5, Belshazzar sees the handwriting on the wall, and the message to him is that he's going to be judged by God, which he is immediately, and his kingdom goes to Darius, who shows up in chapter 6, where Daniel faces the lions on account of his faithfulness to God. Chapter 7, Daniel has a vision in which he sees beasts rising out of this tumultuous, chaotic sea, and then he has a vision of this eternal kingdom that God has. So in terms of our structure, chapter 2 and chapter 4 are similar. They both are talking about 4 human kingdoms, 4 earthly kingdoms, and then the 5th eternal kingdom of God, which will surpass them all, even destroy them all, and then endure forever. In the chronology of this chapter, we're backing up, actually. So according to our timeline, we started in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, which was early in Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Then we were in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar. He built a statue in chapter 3. We don't know when. Chapter 4 is near the end of Nebuchadnezzar's career. Chapter 5 takes us to Belshazzar and the fall of Babylon in 539. Chapter 6 is 539-ish, as Darius the Mede is king, probably early in his career. Chapter 7, we're going back. We're now in the 1st year of Belshazzar. Chapter 7 is really pivotal, actually almost literally pivotal in the book of Daniel. So you're familiar with this chiastic structure and how Daniel 7 is part of it. So it is Aramaic, and it is tied to chapter 2 thematically, sort of holds this whole thing together. But Daniel 7 is also a change in genre. So we shift here from the narrative, from the stories that we've been looking at for 6 chapters, and now, starting with chapter 7, we're going to be looking at apocalyptic visions. So Daniel 7 holds the first part of the book together, but it's really linked to the second part in its genre. And it actually casts a vision that the other visions will fill out and fill in some details. So it's actually also what I consider to be the heart and the hinge of the book. So in Daniel 7, we will see this cosmic view of God's kingdom. And in the middle of this view that we get, we have this astounding view of the throne room. And along with seeing this throne room, we see one like the Son of Man receive the kingdom, and the saints will rule forever over this eternal kingdom. It's this glorious picture, this encouragement for people who had been oppressed, that there was a reward ahead, that this glorious inheritance was going to be theirs. Once we get out of chapter 7, the encouragement is much more scant. It's not nearly as glorious as chapter 7. Chapter 7 is fabulous in terms of the vision of encouragement that it casts. And if you take that encouragement, it can get you through the rest of the book. You keep that long vision of this eternal reward, this inheritance of the saints, this glorious kingdom of God. So chapter 7 is pretty spectacular and pretty important in the book. It's actually the chapter that keeps people from neatly dividing the book. You could try to divide it by genre, but chapter 7 connects you to language. If you try to divide it by language, chapter 7 is going to connect you back to the apocalyptic. So you can't take the book apart. Chapter 7 holds it together. And I think that's appropriate given the vision that it portrays and the hope and encouragement that it casts. So let's talk a little bit about the kind of literature that it is. Chapter 7 is apocalyptic literature. And apocalyptic literature is actually part of a larger group, or a larger kind of literature called visionary literature. And in visionary literature, you have a kind of writing in which the author or the writer sees things, pictures things at the time of the writing that exist in their imagination or what they're seeing, but not yet an empirical reality. That definition largely comes from Leland Ryken. He's got a great book on how to read the Bible as literature and get more out of it. So a lot of my thoughts here about this visionary literature and how to approach it come from his resource. So the visions themselves might depict things that will literally happen, but they do it symbolically. So even though they're portraying things that might actually happen, you have to sort through the symbolism to figure out what those things are. So they might depict literal events, but the symbolic descriptions don't necessarily represent those events literally. So under this umbrella of visionary literature, if you want to think of it that way, we have prophetic literature, or just prophecy, I'll say, and we have apocalyptic. They share things in common, but they're not the same. They're not simply interchangeable. We'll come back to some of these differences in a second. Visionary literature offers several different kinds of messages, depending on the particular purpose of the author. It's often giving encouragement to oppressed people. Or it might be warning an oppressor that punishment is coming. So it can either be speaking to the oppressed, it might be warning the oppressor, and in the middle of all that, it calls to faith those who might be wavering between God's truth and human wisdom. When we talk about apocalyptic literature, easy for me to say, there are some common characteristics that help us identify it when we see it. And these things that I'm going to talk about don't have to all be present in any one piece of literature. What scholars tend to look for is a cluster of symbols, a cluster of characteristics, so several of these traits evident in a piece of literature. So the first thing, easiest one, is a lot of symbolism. It's probably the hardest thing about apocalyptic literature is trying to deal with the symbolism. Also very common in this kind of literature are visions and otherworldly journeys. So your seer, your person who's seeing the vision, might be on a journey in some other world. And they'll often have a supernatural or an angelic interpreter helping them understand the things that they're seeing. And often the visionary, the seer, is a famous, respected person from the distant past, like Abraham or Enoch or one of the patriarchs. And that name will be taken by the person seeing, and they will use that as the name under which they write. So it's pseudonymous. Did I say that right? I think so. It's an anonymous author. They take a different name, a fake name, so to speak, and apply it to the vision that they're seeing. And the reason they do that is because they might be a nobody, but they're drawing on this name that people respect and a tradition that's respected with that name to communicate the vision that they've had. The accounts will often involve persecution of the righteous, cosmic destruction, final judgment, the destruction of the world, and then often a recreation. How to tell the difference between these two kinds of literature? There are several things that are characteristic of one and not the other. So in prophecy, something we very often see is the statement, "Thus saith the Lord," or "Thus says the Lord," and then the prophet says what the Lord has told him to say. You don't really see that so much in apocalyptic literature. What you see, or you hear, revelation that's given through visions. So you just get the vision. You don't have it prefaced by, "Thus says the Lord." It's a vision report. In prophecy, they will often be associated with real time, with real people in their real time. So Isaiah was prophesying to people when Isaiah, the real person, lived. In apocalyptic literature, as I just said, sometimes they will draw on names of respected people from the past. So it's not a real person in their present time. That's common in apocalyptic literature. You also will have in prophecy, prophets are generally speaking to their own immediate situation. They're speaking to things that their people are encountering at that time, and they're speaking God's encouragement for the future. There could also be future fulfillment to what they're saying, but they're addressing an issue that their people are facing at that time. With apocalyptic literature, you sometimes will have this after-the-fact prophecy, where the ex eventu prophecy. So the prophet, this name from the past, is telling history as if it's a prophecy. It's things the audience probably already knows, and then it projects a bit into the future, with the intention of encouraging people by seeing God's hand in the past. With that encouragement, they can hope, rest on the fact that he will continue to work in the future. Symbolism, again, is very extensive in apocalyptic. Prophecy does use symbolism, but not nearly to the same extent. Another fairly significant difference is that in prophecy, there is the awareness that the world does not meet God's ideal at this point. It's flawed, it's broken, it's sinful, but he's ultimately going to transform it. He's going to make things new. He's going to fix it. For apocalyptic literature, things are so bad that only wiping the slate clean and totally starting over. Cosmic catastrophe, that's the only way to fix it. And the last thing about apocalyptic literature and prophecy that I want to highlight is one of the primary goals of prophecy was to call the people to repent. So you're sinning, repent. If you repent, judgment could be averted. If you're not going to repent, judgment is coming. But after judgment, there's restoration. That's a repeated theme throughout the Old Testament prophets. Apocalyptic tends to have a more deterministic perspective. So we'll see this even in Daniel, where you have fixed periods of time in history. This almost determinism, that this is how God has set things out. And we are almost at the last one. So God's just about to act cosmically and fix things. So, well, I think that's enough on apocalyptic literature. Let's jump into chapter 7. All right, let me start with a qualifier. So when people read Daniel 7, there's often a lot of interest expressed in the identity of the four kingdoms represented by the four beasts. Same with chapter 2. And I said when we were in chapter 2 that I was going to put a lot of that off to chapter 7, which I am. But today, in this particular lecture, I'm going to put it off until one more lecture. And I'm going to combine 7 and 8 and talk about all three of those chapters, 2, 7, and 8 together. So we'll get there. But what I care most about, at least in this lecture, is what the text cares about. And what the text cares about is not the identity of the kingdoms. What the text cares about is very different. There's a different emphasis. It doesn't mean we shouldn't care at all about them. Okay, I do care about them. It's helpful when you're interpreting. But that's not the emphasis of the chapter. So we're going to start with the text itself. We're going to look at the things that it emphasizes. And then after that, in a lecture or two, we will talk about the identity of the kingdoms again. One more explanatory note. I organize my outline of this chapter a little bit differently than a lot of commentaries do. And I've structured it based on an article in which a New Testament scholar analyzed the book of Revelation, which is clearly apocalyptic. And he structured it according to some key literary features that he identified. So I'm going to use some of his language to help us structure the book of Daniel also. And some of that language, one of the things I will talk about is the space-time referent. So we will hear when and where something is happening. We will also have a series of formulaic statements that actually help us organize the structure of the vision. So things like, behold, or I saw, or I was looking and I saw. There are several of those throughout these visions that I will use to organize my outline. One word, one phrase I want to acquaint you with is a vision block. So chapter 7 is a vision, but it's separated into 3 vision blocks, 3 large chunks that are each introduced by a very similar phrase. Within these major sections, there are several minor sections. So vision elements, they might be called, or an individual vision. So I have 3 major sections, 3 vision blocks, and then within each of those are several visionary elements or individual visions. And again, it's based on the structure of the text and the literary features that are there. So my 3 blocks, just to help you sort of track with where we're going. Make sure I get the references right. Wait, I just lost myself. 1 through 6. This is verses 1 through 6. And then verses 7 through 12. And then 13 through whatever the last one is, 28. And each of these starts with a pretty long introductory statement, the same one. And that statement is, I was looking in my visions in the night, and then you get the visionary block. I was looking in my visions in the night, and then you get the block. I was looking in my visions in the night, and you get the block. All right, so I'm going to read them block by block, and we'll go through each block. So the first vision block, verses 1 through 6, this is what I've called the vision of the 3 beasts. All right, Daniel 7, 1 through 6. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. All right, so you probably heard several what are individual visions. Some key words in there. Behold, I looked and behold. The first one is in verse 2. And there he says, beasts rising from the sea. And then specifically he says a first beast was like a lion. And the second one was verse 4. And he sees the transformation of the lion. And then the next one is verse 5, and that's the second beast, which is a bear-like creature. And the last one is in 6, and that's the third beast, which is the leopard-like creature. But at the beginning of this is verse 1, which is our space-time referent. Gives us the time and the place, and where are we? First of all, notice we're a third-person narrator talking right now, right? Daniel saw a dream. So in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. So we've gone back in chronology. We have a disrupted chronology here. The literal year of this, if we take it literally, and I'm not sure if it's meant literally, is 553 BC. that's the first year of Belshazzar. If it's meant to mean something more like early or at the beginning of the reign of, well, we're still probably close to 553. It's really common in visions, by the way, to have these date formulas, to have the space-time reference, just to orient the reader to where the seer is. And in Daniel, these date formula also link the visions back to the narrative chapters. So they ground them in that chronology that you're already sort of familiar with. These visions aren't just out there as some separate part of the book. They're connected to stories and characters that you've already met. And in this case, it's Belshazzar. Both this vision and the next one in chapter 8 are dated to Belshazzar's reign. And I've spent a lot of time wondering why that is. Why do we care that this is in the reign of Belshazzar? Why did he get these visions now and not during the reign of, say, Nebuchadnezzar? Why doesn't the narrator bother to tell us that anyway? I think part of the reason is Belshazzar is the book's first glimpse at this defiant, blasphemous king. And when we were in chapter 5, I suggested to you that he's a prototype for these even worse kings who will come. And in Daniel 7, we will get a vision of one of those worse kings to come. So I think by evoking Belshazzar's memory here, we are almost creating this ominous sense of, oh, Belshazzar, nothing good can come during Belshazzar's reign. We know what he was like. He was arrogant. He shook his fist at God. And those are the very things that these visions are going to show in amplified form. Ernest Lucas, who wrote the Apollos commentary I had here the other day, he calls Belshazzar a pale foreshadowing of the kings that appear in Daniel's visions. And I think that's a helpful way to think of it. All right, so in this first individual vision, in verse 2, he sees 4 beasts rising out of the sea, rising out of a tumultuous sea. And the winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. 4 could be literal. It's entirely possible. And he describes 4 literal beasts, right? But it could also be a sense of totality, like it is with the 4 winds. So he says the 4 winds are stirring up the great sea. Well, 4 winds? What he means is wind from every direction is swirling around and stirring up the sea. So he does see 4 beasts, but when we get to the interpretation, those beasts have historical reference, I believe, but I think there might be more, that this is a totality. The Great Sea in the Bible is typically understood to refer to the Mediterranean Sea. I think here it probably refers more likely to the great mythological sea, that's this primeval chaos, this disorder that needs to be controlled. It's a threat to the order of creation, and only the power of the gods in ancient mythology can control the sea. We get hints of that in Genesis 1, where the waters or the Spirit of God is hovering over the face of the waters. And what God does in chapter 1 is he brings order to this chaos, to this watery mess of chaos he brings order to. Other ancient Near Eastern cultures have their own creation stories, creation myths for them, and they typically involve this chaotic primeval sea. So in the Enuma Elish, which is the Babylonian myth, we have the god Marduk, who fights against the sea goddess, Tiamat, and he's fighting for rulership of the gods, kingship over the gods. In the Ugaritic myth of creation, they have a cloud-riding god whose name is Baal, and Baal defeats the sea god, and by defeating the sea god, he earns the right to kingship over the gods. I can tell you that in ancient Near Eastern thinking, this great primeval sea is foreboding. It's ominous. Nothing good can come out of a scene that has the primeval sea. And I think this is true in Daniel's vision too. When he sees this tumultuous sea, that's ominous. And then what comes out of the sea is also not very comforting. 4 beasts arise, and he describes the first 3 he describes as being like something else. So this is not exactly a lion that he sees. It's not exactly a bear. It's not exactly a leopard. It's something like a lion, like a bear, like a a leopard. But yet each one of them has features that clearly make them un-lion-like, un-bear-like, un-leopard-like. The lion has wings like an eagle. The bear is kind of hunched over. We're not exactly sure what the language means about it being raised up on one side. It's got ribs hanging out of its mouth, and it's kind of mutant-looking. The leopard has 4 heads. Well, that's not a normal leopard. And it's got wings. So that's what he sees in this first vision. Okay? Then, in the second series of visions, all here, so we have this. So, okay, I just covered this one. It's a lot of talking to just cover that one. Verse 4 shows this transformation of this first beast. It's changed from being this lion-like creature into a creature that's really more human than animal. Rather than being down on all fours, it's standing on 2 feet. It has a human heart. And you get this passive verb language describing it. Its wings were plucked. The creature was lifted. It was set on its feet. A human heart was given to it. It's as if this creature has no control over any of these things. They're being done to it, such that the beast ultimately becomes something more human than beast. The bear-like creature, like I said, it's raised up on one side. Maybe it's ready to pounce. That's what some people think. The ribs in its mouth might represent the fact that it's just slaughtered a couple creatures and recent exploits it hasn't quite finished eating yet. This beast is given permission to act. So what I mean by that is it also is being acted on by an outside force. It says, another beast was raised up. It had 3 ribs, and it was told, arise, devour much flesh. So it's given permission to go devour more. The leopard, 4 heads, 4 wings, and it is given dominion. Again, a passive verb describing what happens with this leopard. All of this together is a really eerie scene. We've got the tumultuous sea. We've got these mutant kinds of creatures rising up out of it. And that is the end of the first vision block. So we will move to the next one. That one's pretty short. Second one is verses 7 through 12. And this one is the 4th beast. After this, I saw in the night visions, or I was looking at my visions in the night, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were the eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The courts sat in judgment, and the books were open. And I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking, and as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed, and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So let me identify the visions we have in this block. There are 5 of them. In verse 7, we have the vision of the 4th beast, or a beast unlike the others, it's called. in verse 8, first part of verse 8, we have a little horn. In the second part of verse 8, we get another "and behold" statement, so another individual vision. This is the little horn's eyes and mouth. And then the last individual, two more individuals, I can't count. The divine throne room, this is number 4. And that's verse 9 and 10. And then 11 and 12 is the fate of the 4 beasts. So each of these individual visions is prefaced by "and I saw," or "and behold," some statement of vision. So what's going on in this section? This 4th creature is not compared to any other creature. The first 3 beasts were all compared to something that Daniel recognized. It's like a lion, like a bear, like a leopard. This one is unlike anything else. He explicitly says, well, he doesn't explicitly say it. He says it's different from all the other beasts, but all he says of it, it's terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. Apparently there's nothing in his collection of thoughts that he can compare this beast to. This beast fills him with dread and fear and terror. It's exceedingly strong. That language, given our chiastic structure here, might help us. Remember we had something here in Nebuchadnezzar's statue that was exceedingly strong. And that was the 4th kingdom. The iron legs were strong as iron, obviously. And here we have a beast with iron teeth. Verse 7 says this beast is different, and it seems to be different not only because of the way it looks, but also because of what it does, or even that it does anything. All these beasts, none of them do anything. They all have things done to them. This 4th beast is doing things, and they're not nice things. It's trampling, it's crushing, it's devouring and breaking things. And it has 10 horns. Horns in the Old Testament are they're symbolic of power. And so this beast has 10 horns. Well, a normal animal would have 2 horns. So the fact that this beast has 10 horns, which is 5 times more than a normal beast would have, suggests that it really has extraordinary power. Then he sees a little horn, this next individual vision. A little horn comes up among the 10 horns. So this is an 11th horn. Now, this is a short little vision, but it's important because this little horn is actually going to dominate the vision from here on out. This 4th beast almost fades into the background, and what the vision is really concerned with is this little horn. And it uproots 3 horns in the process of coming up. And what's more, Daniel says, I saw eyes and mouth on this little horn. And this mouth was speaking boastful things or great things. It doesn't tell us what those great things were, but often in the Old Testament, verses about eyes and speech suggest to us that they indicate character. So it might be that this description of this little horn having human eyes and a mouth that doesn't stop might be suggesting its arrogance, which will become explicit later. This little horn is going to be characterized by arrogance and irreverence and wickedness. Then Daniel has another individual vision in verse 9, and he sees a throne room. He looks and he sees thrones being placed and the Ancient of Days taking his seat. It doesn't tell us where this throne room is. We might naturally think it ought to be in heaven. It's possible it could be on earth. Just depends on how you want to interpret the context. But what we're probably looking at here is a vision of the divine council. Now, that may not be a familiar concept to you, so let me do a little crash course on divine counsel. So ancient Near Eastern religions all had in their belief system a divine council, a council of the gods. And there were levels, there were tiers of power. And at the top of the council was the high god, El. He's often pictured as an old man with gray hair and a long beard. And below El is the royal family. His sons and daughters. But specifically, the one that we're going to care about among this royal family is El's son, Baal. Baal is the cloud rider. He's in control of weather, which therefore means he's also in control of fertility of the fields and agriculture. So Baal is in the second tier, this royal family of El. Below that, we have craftsman gods. And below them, we have servant gods, a class of servant gods. So messengers, the ones who do all the work for everybody else. This is your typical structure of an ancient Near Eastern divine council. Now, Israel is an ancient Near Eastern culture. They also have the concept of a divine council. It's a little bit different, but it is similar in structure. At the top is Yahweh. And a tier below that, we have who are called the sons of God in the Old Testament. The sons of God, which the sons of God are the ones to whom God assigns territories and kingdoms to rule. So these are sons of God. Then below them, we have servant gods or messenger gods. So angels delivering messages. They're divine creatures, supernatural beings. They're part of this council. We don't know of any craftsman god layer in this divine council that Israel had. I'm just going to call them servants. So this is the general concept Israel had of a divine council. This is what everybody else had. Now on the surface, they look pretty similar. Daniel 7 in this vision is actually going to highlight the most important difference between Israel's divine council and everybody else's. If the divine council is of interest to you, the scholar that I know who's done the most work on it is Michael Heiser. You can Google him. He's got lots of articles. He's got a website. He's got a lot of eclectic interests, so he also researches UFOs, but he's done great work on the divine council. So I strongly, if this is interesting to you, his work is worth checking out. Okay, so we have this Ancient of Days in Daniel's vision, back to Daniel's vision. The Ancient of Days sitting on a throne. Oops, lost my page. The Ancient of Days is a title that's been popularized in some music that we might sing in church, but it's pretty rare in the canon, in the Old Testament, in the Bible. The only place where it occurs is in this chapter, Daniel 3, and it occurs 3 times, Daniel 7, 3 times. What it's talking about is the eternality of God, and that's a very common theme in the Bible. But the actual title, Ancient of Days, highlights his authority, his longevity, and it only appears here in Daniel 7. This vision of the throne room is, most people consider it to be poetry, Hebrew poetry, which makes it kind of stand out in this vision. It's something different. It's a different kind of syntax, different kind of language. It's poetic. It sticks out. And that helps to highlight how significant this is in the vision. There's a lot of fire in this vision. We've got a fiery throne. We've got wheels with burning fire. We've got a river of fire. And ultimately, we'll have judgment with fire. There's a lot of fire. And fire in the Old Testament is often associated with appearances of God. When you think of Moses in the burning bush, God was appearing to him. Mount Sinai has fire atop it when God is meeting with his people. God leads them through the wilderness by a pillar of cloud and pillar of fire that kept them warm at night. Ezekiel has a vision with a fiery chariot throne and wheels burning in wheels. There's fire. Fire represents the presence of God. But it also represents God's judgment. So in Psalms 97, talks about fire goes out from before him, meaning God, and consumes his foe. Fire devours before him when he comes to judge. In Leviticus 10, Nadab and Abihu offer a strange fire, and they are consumed by a fire that comes out from God to judge them. And in Daniel 7, we have a river of fire that will also be used in judgment. This scene culminates with the court convening, everybody sits, and the books are opened. Doesn't say what kind of books. There are several different kinds in the Bible. What happens next in this vision suggests that these books contain the grounds for judgment. And then this last individual vision in the second block is the fate of the four beasts. Daniel's looking and he sees the fourth beast killed, destroyed, given to the fire. The three beasts had their dominion taken away, and an extension of life was given to them. So again, a string of passive verbs with judgment being issued to the beasts. We don't know exactly what the text means when it says of the three beasts that their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. It's not exactly clear what that means, but what it does at least remind us is that those three beasts were different from this fourth beast, and so the judgment is also different. Fourth beast is destroyed by fire. All right, that takes us to our final vision block, which is the longest and arguably the most important. It's the climax and the conclusion of the vision. Verses 13 through 28. And I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. These four great beasts are four kings, kings who shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever and ever. Well, then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet, and about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, and before which 3 of them fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. And as I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, as for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth, and trample it down, and break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and this shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Here is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. All right, let me give you the visions that Daniel sees in this one, how we organize this block. Okay, the first individual vision is this one coming with the clouds and receiving the eternal kingdom. One like a son of man. So he comes with the clouds, he receives the kingdom. And then in verse 8, I messed that up. And then, so this is 13 and 14. Then in 15 through 20, we have this interpretive interlude. So Daniel's been watching all these things transpire, and suddenly he's concerned, he's anxious, he's troubled, and he approaches one of those who stood there, someone in his vision apparently, who's standing there. He approaches and he asks them what all this means. So in the middle of this vision, we get an interpretation, partial interpretation. So I call this an interpretive interlude. It's part of the vision, but it's interpretation, not new vision. And it's the first one. There's going to be two. And then in verse 21 and 22, his visionary experience continues, and he sees the little horn and the holy ones, interaction between the little horn and the holy ones. And then in 23 through 27, we have more interpretation. Another interpretive interlude. And then verse 28 is actually Daniel's conclusion. It's not part of the vision proper. It's his concluding words. So that's the structure of the third block. Let's just go through each section here. So in verses 13 and 14, he sees this one like a son of man, which simply means it's one who looks like a human. Like a son of man means this is a human-like figure. Notice that we're back to this comparative language again. The first three beasts were like something else. Here we have a figure who is like a human being. And that's a contrast. Beasts, here we have a human. He sees someone like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. Whenever we get cloud imagery in the Old Testament, we should pay attention. Sometimes clouds just refer to the billowy things in the sky, referring to a meteorological phenomenon. Sometimes clouds are used figuratively. They'll talk about the impermanence of something, or immensity, or impenetrability. It's used as imagery for something else. Most commonly, though, the use of clouds in the Old Testament is related to theophanies, or appearances of God. So about 58 times out of 87, if my source counted correctly, 87 occurrences occur in the context of God's presence. These are especially prevalent in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books. We have Yahweh's glory cloud above Sinai, above the tent of meeting. We have his presence in the cloud pillar. And then in the later temple text, we hear about the cloud. The imagery, though, of someone coming on the clouds or someone coming with the clouds is particularly relevant here in Daniel 7. So in ancient Near Eastern literature, someone rides the clouds like a chariot. Okay, they don't just float on the clouds. That's what we think of when we're on the clouds. You float on the clouds. This is someone riding the clouds like they're a chariot. Baal is the most famous of them. Baal actually has the nickname the Cloud Rider, or Rider of the Clouds. And you can see depictions of him atop a cloud with his lightning bolt in his hand because he's in charge of the weather, and he's going to either bless his subjects or not with rain. In the Bible, we have an image of cloud riding also. Yahweh is the one who rides the clouds. So in the book of Psalms, he rides the clouds through the heavens. Sometimes he rides the clouds in judgment. That shows up in Isaiah and Jeremiah and Nahum. Well, what's curious in Daniel's vision is that he's got the throne, right? And on the throne, he's got the Ancient of Days. I know that's a bad throne. Ancient of Days, Yahweh, right? But he also has someone riding a cloud. And there I just made a billowy cloud. He's got a cloud rider. But in the Old Testament, someone riding a cloud is Yahweh. Well, how do we do that? We've got Yahweh riding the clouds. We've got Yahweh on the throne. In Daniel's vision, Yahweh's on the throne, and there's also a cloud with someone riding on it. What Daniel is seeing in this single vision are two Yahweh figures. He sees the Ancient of Days, and he sees the cloud rider. And this cloud rider receives the right to rule, right? He appears before the throne, and the Ancient of Days gives him the right to rule, gives him the eternal kingdom. Daniel is, strangely enough, seeing two powers in heaven. He sees the one on the throne, the Ancient of Days, and he sees the cloud rider. He sees a vice regent, someone given shared power with Yahweh. But it is Yahweh. How do we explain that? Let me go back over here to this divine council. In typical ancient Near Eastern divine councils, El is the high god. At least in Ugaritic this is true. Ugarit. His vice regent is Baal. Baal, the cloud rider, is given the right to rule. This is his vice regent. So El and vice regent Baal. They're not the same. They're not on the same level. El is the high god. Baal is part of the family. What Daniel 7 suggests is that in the Israelite divine council, we have Yahweh, the Ancient of Days, and we have a vice regent given the right to rule who shares his essence. He's not lower. It's the same language. We expect Yahweh to be the cloud rider. We have two powers, equal powers in heaven. Do we have two gods? No. They're both Yahweh. Well, how can that be? Well, that's the big difference in the Israelite divine council and the ancient Near Eastern divine council. And what I want you to maybe think through here is that this Old Testament concept of the divine council is the perfect structure for moving to the New Testament and understanding the person of Jesus. We would say, well, Jesus is this vice regent, the one who's given the right to rule. He receives the kingdom. Yes, he's also of the same essence as the Father. This is an astounding picture of Israel's divine council, and it shows the most significant difference between Israel's council and other councils. And this is part of, I think, in my view, what makes Daniel 7 such a powerful text. This human-like figure, who we will come to know much later in the canon, is given dominion and a glorious kingdom forever. But what's more is this kingdom that this Son of Man figure receives is shared with the saints, and they rule with him forever. So there's this incredible relationship that, like I said, just provides the encouragement you need to get through anything else that the book of Daniel might have. This splendid picture of Israel's God and his greatness. This is the figure who will receive the service or the worship of all peoples, nations, and languages. Okay, so that's the end of this first part of that vision. And then we have this interpretive interlude where Daniel is, whoa, he doesn't know what to do with this. So he approaches one standing by, probably one of the attendants around the throne, and he asks to know what it all means. And I love the initial interpretation. Daniel says, he asked him for the truth concerning all this. And so he told me, these four great beasts are four kings who shall arise out of the earth. And then he moves into talking about the saints. That's all you get. These four beasts are four great kings. That's it? That's all we get? That's not what this vision cares most about. This vision cares most about the saints associated with this Son of Man figure and the inheritance that they receive. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. That's the initial interpretation. That's all he gets. And we got a whole lot of questions about these wacky creatures. The angel says, 4 great kings, but the saints of the Most High are going to inherit the kingdom forever and ever. The saints of the Most High weren't even in the original vision. And here they show up in this initial interpretation. So understandably, Daniel wants to know a little bit more, so he pushes a little farther. I desire to know the truth about specifically this 4th beast. The 4th beast is bothering him because it's different from the rest. It's very terrifying. And he really almost takes us through what he initially saw of this beast, and he adds a few things. So here we learn that it has claws of bronze. That wasn't in the first description. And he wants to know about that beast. He wants to know about the 10 horns and that little horn and the 3 horns and the eyes and the mouth. I want to know more about this. And while he's wanting to know more about this, he seems to see things still happening between this little horn and the saints of the Most High. So that takes us to another vision. While he's asking for information, he sees this little horn making war with the saints and prevailing, until the Ancient of Days comes and passes judgment in favor of the saints. Okay, so let's slow down a little bit. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings. And I think we can try to identify 4 literal kingdoms. We'll do that in 2 lectures. I think at this point, maybe it's totality. That's all the angel cares about. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings. And remember, these 4 beasts grew or arose out of a sea that was swirling from the 4 winds. So there's totality in this imagery. The greatest interest to the interpreter is this transfer of sovereignty from those 4 beastly earthly kingdoms to the holy ones of the Most High. And so I think we can assume that the details in the vision, the original visions, that they're significant. But I think the little information we're given in the interpretation should caution us against holding to any one view too tightly or to assigning too much significance to things that are really secondary in the text. Let's see. So he asks for more information specifically about this 4th beast. Then he sees this additional conflict happening. And then we get another interpretive interlude. So after he sees this happening, we get some more interpretation. Just a little more here. We get more information about the 4th beast, which represents a kingdom. And again, this might be symbolic. Notice how the angel repeats it. He says, "As for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the others." Using 4 in apocalyptic literature, according to Greg Beale, who's written a mammoth commentary on the book of Revelation, he says 4 might be hinting at the symbolic nature of things here. So 4 in apocalyptic literature, he says, is a number of completeness, especially connoting something of universal or worldwide scope. It's the number of cosmic completeness. So I think while we can talk about who specifically this 4th kingdom identifies, we also need to back away and say, this vision is cosmic. This is not just restricted to 4 human empires. We're talking cosmic significance here. There's universality to this 4th beast. The 10 horns, we're told, are 10 kings arising from this 4th kingdom. This could be symbolic. 10 is a common number in apocalyptic literature. History is often divided into 10 periods of time. It could be symbolizing completeness. But again, the horn is a symbol of power. So we have this beast with extraordinary power. Then that 11th little horn that was troubling Daniel so much. This king is unique. He's going to be different from the earlier kings. He's going to subdue 3 kings. And again, we can try to identify who those are, but the angel doesn't tell us, so I'm not going to get too dogmatic about that. this little horn, this 11th king, is going to speak words against the Most High. There's no explanation given for the eyes, but as we noted before, it might just be a suggestion of the arrogance or the wickedness in the behavior of this little horn. Who are these holy ones? These holy ones that are spoken against and that are oppressed, and the holy ones that inherit this kingdom. Who are they? Well, in the Old Testament generally, and in Daniel, pretty broadly speaking, and I think even here, holy ones are best understood as heavenly beings, so supernatural beings. However, I think the book of Daniel is one of the rare places in the Bible where we have the curtain pulled back. Typically, the Bible is concerned with life on earth, your life on earth. God's working through history. God works out his plan on planet Earth, okay? That's most of the Bible's interest. But every so often, we get this curtain pulled back, and we see that there's a little more than life on earth going on. There's a supernatural world. We don't get a whole lot of information about it. We get a few glimpses that there's warring going on there, there's fighting, there's struggles. We'll see more of this in Daniel 10 and 11. We've got cosmic, angelic fights going on. And I think that we get this idea that things that happen on earth are mirrored in some way by things that happen in that heavenly realm, and vice versa. So when we talk about something happening to the holy ones, if we want to press the language, I'd say, well, those are angels or they're divine beings, but whatever conflict is happening with them is reflected on earth as well. So it gets a little dicey, and because the Bible gives us so little information about it, it's not something I talk a lot about because I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell me. We just get little glimpses that there's something going on behind that curtain. And in the book of Daniel, I think the lines kind of blur between those two realms, such that in this vision, we're not really sure. Are we seeing people? Are we seeing angels? Who's this happening to? But there's a relationship between them. So if the little horn and, say, his heavenly counterparts, whatever sons of God are over that territory, this little horn and his heavenly counterparts are oppressing the holy ones of the Most High, that's going to be manifest in heavy oppression of the Holy One's people on earth. Okay. By the time the interpretation is finished, we have a lot of questions not answered. We're left with this explanation that these beasts are going to be judged, the little horn's going to be judged, and the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the, not the holy ones, but to the people of the holy ones of the Most High. Now, some translations will say people of the saints of the Most High. Saints is that holy ones expression throughout the Old Testament. So I think that's another little hint that we have angelic beings and we have human beings, and there's some relationship between those two that we're not quite sure about. But in verse 22, it said the holy ones would possess the kingdom. In verse 27, the people of the holy ones will possess the kingdom. There's lots of mystery. There's lots of mystery in the interpretation and in the vision. There are lots of details unaddressed, and then there are some details interpreted that aren't even in the vision. And I'm okay with mystery. I'm okay letting the Bible say what it says and asking the questions that I have of it, coming to the best answers I can come to, but then backing away and saying there's mystery here. I don't know all the answers, and I'm content with that. Daniel concludes by saying, "My thoughts greatly alarmed me." Well, no doubt. He just had a vision of great oppression for the people of the holy ones of the Most High. Where is he historically? He's back in Belshazzar's reign. He's on the verge, really, of restoration. When Cyrus issues his decree in 539, Israel will be free and even funded in some ways to go back to the land. Enforced exile is about over. Surely the prophet's words about this glorious restoration are about to happen. That's the hope I'm betting that Daniel has while he's in exile, this hope of glorious restoration. And then he has this vision that says, well, you're going to have to wait. There's still great suffering ahead. When we get to chapter 9, we're really on the verge of restoration, and Gabriel will say, yeah, that's just a little part. There's a whole lot more to this whole picture. So hang on, Daniel. Daniel's troubled, but he keeps the matter in his heart. I don't know who he would ask about it anyway, but he's alarmed and he's troubled by it. And this sort of reaction is really only going to intensify as his visions continue. So that's the end of Vision Block 3. It's the end of the whole report. It's the end of the chapter. What's interesting is that Daniel, who is known to be able to interpret visions, he can't interpret this one. It's a mystery to him. There are worse times ahead for his people, but there's also great comfort in this vision of the throne room and the one like a son of man receiving. There's great comfort in that. And it's also a reminder, I think, that for God's people, that they're not fighting alone. This warring that's going on is between the little horn and the holy ones. Now, they're involved in it, but this is a cosmic struggle. This is not just their fight on earth or their struggle on earth. There is cosmic significance to what they are facing, but it's all under God's control. And the best news for them is that God's eternal kingdom is ultimately going to triumph. BZAW has a commentary on Daniel, and he summarizes this whole chapter by saying, nothing less than world order is at stake. And the holy ones of the Most High, both the celestial and the terrestrial, are together the champions fighting on the side of all that is good. So that is a great comfort for people who face apocalyptic type times. And sometimes in the culture I live in, I haven't really faced those, which makes apocalyptic literature especially hard to understand because it's not real to my situation. But there are people around the world for whom this literature is very real. Suffering is very real. And the comfort offered by this encouragement is huge. That's the end of Daniel 7. We'll get back to Daniel 8 next time we meet.
This is Dr. Wendy Widder in her teaching on the book of Daniel. This is session number 10, Daniel chapter 7, God's superior king and eternal kingdom.